Okay. All right, well, I want to thank you for coming to the SUSDA Diversity Panel. There were a lot of questions that you all submitted. They were great questions. I'll go back into that in a little bit. Just letting you know that we have snacks in the back, we have orange juice, we have a water fountain outside if you want. And he's just back there cleaning up some water for some tea. Okay. So feel free to stand up and go back in case you need to get some during the panel. Okay, oh yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So with me, my co-moderator is Joelle Pretty. So Joelle Pretty is a former SUSDA president. She was an alum in the nice early days, the golden years.
That's right, 2000 grade.
And she is currently the director of pre-major studies and student academic persistence. Yeah. So before we begin, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, a breakdown. There isn't really much to the panel. There's really two large sections, and the first part will be introducing our lovely panelists, and then going into the questions themselves. We have 6 questions total for the first hour, pretty much, and then we're going to go into the last 30 minutes. We'll give you the opportunity to ask questions that you might have. Okay? All right. So, I will introduce our panelists. By the way, we have 3 of 4 of our panelists currently. Our 4th will be here any minute, so just sit tight. But I will introduce who we have currently. Well, actually, would you like? We'll start from the left.
I will start, and this absent chair will be Michelle Murray. In July 2006, Dr. Michelle Murray joined Seattle University as Assistant Vice President for Student Development. Prior to her appointment at SU, Dr. Murray developed an affinity for Jesuit higher education at Loyola College in Maryland, where she served as Director of Leadership and Youth Student Programs and Assistant Director of Student Activities. She received her PhD in Education Policy and Leadership from the University of Maryland, her master's degree in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration from the University of Vermont, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia.
And to Michelle's left when she comes in, we have Diane Schmitz. And Diane Schmitz is an educator, minister, and writer focused on facilitating social change with an emphasis on racial equity. She is currently a director of student development at Seattle University, specifically the director of community transfer of life, and does organizational consulting, and is part of a team creating a new outreach ministry called Sacred Action for Racial Justice. Is this still considered new?
No, probably not.
Sounds
good then.
What motivates Diane's work for social justice is a deep belief in the capacity for change in individuals and organizations. She believes in the importance of both reflection and action as a holistic approach to becoming effective change agents in our communities and the world.
Looking radiant in red is Associate Dean of Students, Terrell Goodwin, in the Division of Student Development, and he coordinates the university's student judicial system. Prior to his role at Seattle University, he served as Assistant Director of Student Life of Judicial Affairs at Creighton University, providing oversight for the Center for Student Integrity. Dean Goodwin possesses a student-centered approach and believes that providing students with the opportunity to explore their own integrity and develop their thinking in ever more complex ways is paramount to a Jesuit education. Dean Goodwin obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in Human Development and Theology from Boston College, a Master's degree in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration from the University of Vermont, a Master's degree in Transforming Spirituality from Seattle University, and is currently a doctoral candidate at San Francisco Theological Seminary.
And last but not least, we have Tim Albert. So Tim Albert is currently the Associate Director in Housing Residence Life. Before Seattle U, he was at Loyola University in New Orleans as Associate Director for Residential Education and Judicial Affairs. While at Loyola, he had the opportunity to experience about 7 hurricanes and tropical storms, including Katrina. While at Loyola, he created the first living learning communities at a Jesuit institution. Wow. He was also a resident director at Pacific Lutheran University. He was there while he finished his master's degree here at Seattle University. And a few tidbits are that he's an avid hiker and go almost every day. And he has 3 dogs who tend to lead the hikes. He comes from a family of 5 boys, all of whom went to Seattle University. So we'll go right in to the first question. And this first question is an easy one. Introduction fun. If you were to create a motto that embodies your philosophy on diversity in higher education, what would it be and why? So let's start, I guess we can start from the left, or if anybody's really right.
Today, this is the one that comes to mind. I was into alliteration. So it's purposeful, passionate, and persistent. And purposeful because I really believe you absolutely have to be intentional. I have a friend who says social justice is not an issue to learn about or to experience, it's a way of living. And to make that really true, you have to be intentional. Passionate because it's difficult work. You have to really care about what you're doing. And persistent because everything is not going to be solved in my lifetime. And I want to contribute what I can while I'm here.
I think for me, the motto would be, it's always important to have a place at the table of decision making. And I think in terms of my own layers of identity, and I think each of us brings to the table multiple layers of identity, whether it's our gender or our faith or whether we're in a partnership or whatever. And whenever we're making decisions, we bring all of those voices to the table, and those voices influence whether or not you advance an idea or you hold something back or you share it. And so for me, it's always important to make sure that I'm bringing a voice to the table, all of those identities, everything about me, into spaces and places where maybe it previously wasn't welcomed or thought about or considered whenever I find myself in a situation.
I apologize, I've been out sick for 4 days, so I haven't actually prepared. But for me, it would be about advocacy. I can't necessarily hope to represent everybody, and I shouldn't. I mean, it's not my job to represent, but it's to make sure that others have the opportunity to advocate for themselves, that they are that voice or that face. And everybody does get a chance to sit at the table and to be part of the decision.
I love that. So I hope you just picked up on that theme, the place at the table theme. I think that's really critical for professionals in higher education. So thank you. Our next question is kind of about resources. So if you could recommend one resource, whether it's a professional development opportunity, a book, an article, a film, something of that nature, to develop one's multicultural confidence, what would that resource be? Diane, I'm going to start with you again.
Oh, okay. That was really hard to choose one. So I'm sneaking in two really fast. So one is a professional development experience, which for me was the Social Justice Training Institute, which is a week-long race immersion focus, folks primarily in higher ed. Very transformative, changed my life. So that's one thing. And then a book would be The White Racial Frame by Joe Fagan. And I'm big on frameworks and looking at systems and institutional lenses. And although Joe Fagan's work is in race, you can really take that framework and you can put it on all sorts of different identities and looking at privilege and oppression in different manners. So I think that's a really helpful focusing lens about how we are socialized. I think I have ideas, see things, surrounded by things, and we don't realize, we just think that's just the normal way of looking, and to realize, well, that's one way of looking. That maybe is the way I've been socialized, but is not necessarily always the most helpful, certainly not the only way.
I think for me, it's Dr. Beverly Tatum's Why All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. And I had a number of books in my office, but I kept coming back to that one because I really like her definition of racism, which is privilege plus power. And I think it's always important to be aware of our own power and then within our identities wherein we have power and how we mix that with the privileges that are afforded to that. It illuminates so many things about how we show up and why we show up in certain places. So I think just the number of her frames, but specifically her frame around isms and how power plays in that, I think is important to help unlock things in us.
Well, this is interesting because they chose the things I was going to say. So I would strongly recommend SJTI for anybody. I mean, it's good. It will be very challenging for you. But yeah, the Social Justice Training Institute, if you can do it, is really great. And everybody I've seen that has gone through it, it's transformative for them. And then Dr. Tatum's book. The other thing I would just kind of recommend is go out and make sure you're experiencing other cultures to the point of where you're challenging yourself. Because it's one thing to study or to read about it and think, I know how to do this. And it's totally different to kind of live experiences more. Not that you can really ever truly walk somebody else's shoes, but at least you can start to understand some frames of reference and understand cultural cues. But that really comes from that experience. So I would strongly recommend getting out into the cultures, experiencing them. As I call it, sort of take a walk about.
I have a bit of a follow-up. Can you go more into the SJTI and sort of some reflections upon it? What did you experience? What were some memorable activities or discussions about it?
You will be challenged, which is very memorable. I would say, that's some of the biggest things. You'll be challenged. And the thing is, people are there to support you, but they are there to challenge you. And they will challenge you probably, especially if you are white, in a way that you are not used to being challenged. But that's good because you can't run away from it during that week. But you have to be open to it too and be ready to be challenged.
I'm wondering if I tell something, will that impact someone's experience in their light? So I will say for me, some highlights were hearing stories that revealed to me a depth of pain for which I had never experienced, and to realize how oblivious I was. And I think of myself as a very caring person, but to really be clueless. And I think the other thing for me, so I went when I was here working with the Intertransfer Student Life. Most of the folks in the cohort I went to were from folks that were from multicultural affairs offices, and this was a mixed racial groups, right? And yet a lot of us had no idea. I was thinking, well, I won't know nearly as much as all these folks who work in these areas. And in fact, that I found that a lot of us had no idea, because again, we've been socialized and educated in certain ways that left big gaps, right? So that storytelling. The other thing, I'm afraid I'm going to give stuff away.
Right.
You go. Oh. Okay, I'm just going to tell one little story. Do we have time? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. This really stuck with me. It's not the biggest one, but I'll save that for your experience. So we did racial caucusing at one point. We come together first and had some time, and then we did some racial caucusing. So, and when the first thing we did when we were in the groups is take flip chart paper and talk about how can we be in conversation together? What do we need to be in authentic dialogue, right? So I'm in the white group, and we fill out the flip chart, bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, bullet 4, bullet 5, bullet 6, and then we go to the second page and another one about what we felt would really help for us to feel safe, for us to be truthful and respectful, and then we actually went to start at page 3, and I'm a process person, but even I by then was saying, really, I think we got enough, right? So the other group was doing theirs, folks, individuals of color, and then we come back together, and the facilitators who knew what they were doing, I think, had the public go first. No, they had the white folks go first. And so we went through our list of all these things, right? And then the other group got up and they said, well, we have 3 things. Risk, speak your truth, and don't hold back. And all of a sudden I thought, yikes. Because I realized all of our list was keeping, we framed it in this way of safe space, which is what really has changed my thinking about carefully articulating what we mean by safe space. What we really meant is don't do anything that makes me uncomfortable. I do not want to be uncomfortable. So if I don't like how I'm feeling, then I won't respond because I want to be safe and I want to be comfortable. So that was a huge lesson for me that I take into every arena that I'm in. What does that really mean about safe? And who makes the rules? And who does it serve? And who does it not serve, right?
Can I jump in? Because I was so sure that I knew what Diane was going to answer for this. That I have to give a plug because the White Privilege Conference is coming to Seattle in April. And it is a huge opportunity. If you haven't been to that conference, it's a really transformative one. It's a different kind of model than any other conference that you've been to. The presenters actually attend as well, and so you're really experiencing the wisdom and the knowledge, collective knowledge that's there. And I have some flyers if anybody wants one afterward.
Me too.
I love how this is flowing because the next question is on white racial identity. And so the question is, what are some specific things I can do as a white professional to signal to students of color that I am a safe person you can go to for support, and that I am interested in working toward allyship?
I'll start. I'm thinking about this from my own student experience, but I think also from a collegial partnership. I think it's the ownership of privilege and the naming of it. And I think that this happens far more at Seattle U and also at University of Vermont. I think in conversation to hear colleagues or even some of our students and even folks in the program sort of name, well, as a white person, this is XXX, or I know that I have privileges in these ways. That just the naming of it kind of, it like releases some air in the room because it gives some kind of mutuality of ground to be able to talk about issues or things that come up, or maybe awarenesses that people haven't yet discovered because it's named, versus when you're existing in a relationship with someone and trying to have a conversation and you know that there's something underlying but everybody's quiet about it and you don't name it, then you talk around the issue as opposed to dealing directly with the issue. A quick example of that, last night I was with Deb Hinchy, who used to work here. We were at a restaurant. We were sitting, we came in before her partner and some other folks came with us. So there's Deb, this white woman, and there's me. And actually, we were in Trader Joe's. So I was with Deb walking around Trader Joe's. One of the guys who works there came up to Deb and asked if she was okay and if I was bothering her. Because I was saying like, oh, come on, we were joking around and thing. So when I walked away, he came up and asked her. And she said, actually, no, he's not bothering me. He's actually one of my closest friends, and he's a colleague. And I think I could take care of myself if something was going on, but I think it was disrespectful that you assumed, and the guy's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, I didn't know any of this, but then when I came back, Deb was able to say, I think, she's like, this guy assumed because you were an African-American male talking to me that you must have been bothering me, blah, blah, blah. And I was able to talk to him about, like, is this why you're doing, but it was the naming of it. Like, I'm acknowledging I'm a white woman and you're a black man, and this is probably what he was doing, as opposed to thinking, oh, well, he misunderstood because we were playing and blah, 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 and not acknowledging that. Not that I'm sure I had it before, but that encounter made me know that, okay, yes, we can have authentic conversations about racism, oppression, all this stuff, because she's able to name it, see it, and own it, even in the midst of the situation. So I think that was helpful.
Yeah, I would agree. You need to own your privilege, no matter what that privilege is, but you need to own it, particularly as a white person. Yeah, I'm white, and you gotta be aware of that. I think white people tend to think, oh, well, yes, I know I'm white, but it's like, no, really own what that means. And I'd say you need to be honest and authentic with people. Students will pick out, folks know when you're not being honest with them, and as soon as you do that, you're closed off. And share. You need to share some of your experience. It can be hard. It can be challenging. We don't want to always share the places that we make come out of, but you have to. Because that's really the only way to be in that authentic dialogue. sort of don't claim to know everything, particularly about other cultural groups. You know, you don't want to tell other people what their experience is, because if you do that, yeah, then you're not a safe place for them to go to. You're not comfortable. And then the other thing I would actually almost challenge the question on is the idea of allyship. I don't necessarily believe, you know, in that true idea of allyship, because I think it serves me more than I think it serves other people. So I don't ever claim to necessarily be an ally. You know, I just try to be as authentic and out there, and people can call me on any of the shit that they think I might have, and it's there. But they can call me on that, but I don't want to sit there and say, oh, yes, I'm your ally in this, because that's kind of, I think, can be patronizing towards other folks, and that's not authentic, it's not real.
Yeah, I had to pick up on that. I think understanding how people who are not in the dominant group might want to, want you to express your desire to be an ally is one thing, so being knowledgeable about that. But I would never call myself an ally. I don't think I'm the one to decide that. The other thing I realized in some of my, it's always a process, but some of the earlier days I was so on fire, and then I would make connections and make relationships with people of color, and I realized, actually it was a colleague of mine who told me, it's going to take a while for trust to develop, because there's a lot of cumulative impact that's here from lots of people over lots of time, and I'm kind of like, oh, well, how could I just, that was one of the learnings that I had. And then I think connected with owning your privilege, for me, it's doing my own work, meaning there are plenty of resources and ways for me to educate myself about this. I don't need to go to others and say, oh, what's it like to be a Latina woman? Will you tell me? How could I? It's like, it's not other people's job to teach me. There are lots of resources. That's different from building relationships and learning through that, but I have to do my own work.
I'm going to just sort of plug on to what Diane was saying a little bit more. I think sometimes we feel as white people that we are owed being liked by people of color, and that can get in the way of you being a professional. If your concern is not for the student, but is, do they like me? Am I respected by them? Am I connecting with them? Right? So I think sometimes our ego gets in the way, and we really need to put the focus back on the student to be an effective professional. So thank you for bringing it up. The next question kind of moves into the workplace and the community a little bit more. We're going to start from the other side, just to give time a break. So talk about a challenge you had when working with colleagues from various levels of multicultural competency, and how you overcome those kinds of challenges in the workplace.
Yeah, actually, when I read this question, it's funny, I immediately went to a particular person that I worked with a number of years ago. And, I think the struggles, this was another white staff member. And, yeah, she knew she was white, but, that's not what she came out of. She definitely was culturally white. But what she had a really hard time seeing is how all those values influenced everyday activities, and how many of her assumptions and her background determined many, many different things. And a lot of it was also, so when we go to hire people, her standards were very culturally white. And so it was very hard for her to see when somebody would come in who'd be qualified, could do the job, but maybe answered things out of a slightly different frame of reference. And unfortunately, even though I worked with her and we tried to be in dialogue on the issue, she could not, it wasn't something that she could move beyond. She kind of came out of a frame of reference of, because of her economic background, I've been somebody who's been deprived. and I've made it here, so, people should conform on it. So it was very, very difficult for me to work with her, especially when it came time to hire people. Unfortunately, sometimes I just had to make the decision, I'm going to hire based on these broader standards, so that we get a more diverse staff, because that was important to me. That was important to our department, that was important to our institution. Sometimes you're going to have to realize you can't change other people's minds for them. You can't get them there. You can be in dialogue with people, you can challenge people, you can help work with people, but if they're not willing to work with you, sometimes you have to make decisions, you'll have to make them on your own, and you'll have to do what you think is best and what you think is right.
Welcome, Dr. Thank you for being here.
I'm so sorry, I just got out of another meeting. But I was running, so I couldn't leave early, so I'm sorry.
No problem. So we are talking about challenges in the workplace when you work with people from varying levels of multicultural competency, and how you deal with those kinds of challenges.
So while she's thinking, I'll just add my last couple sentences. So remember, you might be able to see other people's privileges, you can't force them to see their own, but that's kind of life. But make sure when you're working with people who have a hard time is that you're also giving them the opportunity to express and to feel, because often when you help work with them on their areas of pain, that's when they can actually start to see their privilege.
I hope I didn't cut you off. Oh.
As I was thinking about the question, I want to approach it a little bit differently, because I think this is the flip side of this question. I think in an environment like Seattle University, for instance, because multicultural competence is something that you hear a lot about, we talk a lot about, it shows up, there's course, like the division as a commitment, that we can get to the place that we're like, oh, well, we're very aware and multicultural competent, and certain things would just never happen here. So I'm going to share an experience that did happen here, because I think it's important to think about. And it's something that I think well, let me not add a value judgment to it. So a few years ago, we decided to bring a speaker. His name was Mike Domich, and he was coming to talk about basically sexual assault on various college campuses. And his presentation was called Can I Kiss You? It was a partnership between housing, integrity formation, multicultural affairs, like a bunch of wonderful offices, very multiculturally competent offices within the division. So we had all joint paid money for this, and he was coming, and so we started with the advertisements. And all of the advertisements were heteronormative. How does a guy get a girl to know, blah, blah, blah. How does a girl get a guy to understand, blah, blah, blah. So at first we printed them up, and they were big, and they were everywhere, and they were going around. And then a student came into my office, and I was like, oh, are you going to go to the Can I Kiss You thing? And the student says, oh, it's not for me. And I'm like, well, what do you mean it's not for you? And they're like, well, all the advertisements are like, how to get a girl, how do you ask a guy, how do you ask a guy to kiss? And I'm not straight, so it's not for me. And I'm like, oh, that's totally not the point of the presentation. I mean, it's for every student, but the advertisements that we all read, we all approved, we all stamped, clearly told students in same-sex relationships, this is not a conversation that you really need to show up to. And so I think that's just another arena of, though we are all aware, though we are in trainings about this, and we're always talking about how to be inclusive from a culturally competent standpoint, sometimes the culture in which we exist in, the dominant culture, still prevails, even when we are trying to do something that actually has a positive impact on community. And it was fascinating because, of course, we were meeting about it, and I'm like, so did anybody pay attention? So I asked, did anybody look at the advertisements? And everybody's like, of course we did. And I'm like, well, then they're stamped from student activities. And then there was the next layer where did anybody notice that? And and I'll be honest, including myself, no. I mean, I mean, of course, and we thought about, well, how do we take advertisements down or add more or redo this whole thing? But I think it's just an example of how even when we are aware, we have to continue to be in conversation with ourselves and sometimes interrogate those things that seem quote unquote natural to us. Oh, of course, just do that. Or, oh, this makes sense. Or, oh, this is communicating what we want to do, because oftentimes they're blinders that even in our awareness, we just have not addressed in how we accompany issues of cultural or multicultural context.
When I think back on some times that I felt it a challenge, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is I need to always remind myself what I know to be true, which is as much work as I try to do and much learning, I am still at the tip of the iceberg in so many areas. So I am always learning. So is everyone else. And so I try not to freeze people in time, is a phrase I like to use, because that's just not real. People always have the capacity to change. The other thing I found is that sometimes, and this requires sometimes some vulnerability on my part, but it's to share stories. Like, well, this is what I did, or this is what I thought. And sort of through that storytelling, maybe give another window into a way that doesn't come across in a way that, well, I know better, or you should know better, or any of that, but just this, to acknowledge that at the time in my life where I had no idea what I was doing, and this is what I learned from that, and that we're all there, we're all learning, right? And so that's,
Thanks for having me, folks. I didn't hear all of Tim's response, so I'm not sure, but from Darrell and Diane, I think my comments are really similar. When I think about the workplace and the challenges in trying to work toward a multiculturally competent setting, community, my own self, that immediately the challenges that first came to mind were the times when I've brushed up against the places where ooh, I didn't know that was a blind spot, or or I just didn't recognize it, and that's okay, as Diane said, however long I've been on this earth, and however long I'll be on this earth. So it's not even about being a professional, right? It's about being a human being. I will always be learning, and I will always be running into things, learning that the world doesn't work the same for other people in the way that has worked for me, or in the ways that I have learned that it's supposed to work. And that's just the facts, right? I think there's definitely a story out there about how the world is supposed to work, whether you fit that story personally or not. And I learned that story, right? And I'm fully aware of the places where my identities don't match up with that story. I am much less aware, or have found myself to be much less aware, when my story does match up, like when my identities do match up with the story of how the world is supposed to work. So, where I have found this to be a challenge, to be someone who is still trying to learn, still becoming multiculturally competent. If I ever get there, please let me know. I don't know. Where I found that to be a challenge is when people have looked to me for leadership, right? So whether that's in my current role or when I was leading students, there wasn't much room, I felt like, for me to not know something. And have actually had people say, you're supposed to know. things that I didn't know. And so, so one of the things that I have done that I would urge each of you to do is to get some folks who you trust, some mentors, so not just peers, although peers can be helpful, but also some mentors who can check you, who you can ask questions to and not be afraid that they're going to say, well, aren't you in charge? Like, aren't you supposed to know? I learned early in my career that having someone, a safe place where I could ask questions and just be vulnerable and say, I don't know the answer to this, was really important. And the thing that one of my mentors shared that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to give you the same permission that she gave me. It's okay to not know something because you didn't know it before. The most important thing is that you recognize that you don't know it, and in that recognition are trying to learn something different. That was the most important. So, and I still talk to those people because I am still learning, and there are still things that I have questions about, and there are still things that I'm like, damn, I put my foot in my mouth. Where did that come from? And sometimes you need somebody to process with. So that would be, I can only talk about the challenges that I've experienced sort of with my own self as a growing, learning human being. Yeah. It's important to know that about yourself, though, and to have courage to keep learning and keep growing. It only hurts for a little while, and then it gets better, and then we find a new growth edge. And but once you experience the growth, often enough, then you realize, okay, well, this is what I need to do, and it's going to get better, and I'm in an okay place. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. So we'll move on to another category. We actually have two questions on the job hunt. And I know initially I said two per person, but we actually have, I feel like we're ahead of schedule, so I'm just going to ask this to all of you. But this first question is, while on the job hunt, what can you do to assess whether the institution's culture around social justice and diversity is a good fit for you?
Well, I immediately thought about one of my first interviews right after graduate school. And we have been taught in our program, you should ask the, quote, diversity question. So I was prepared. I had exactly what I was supposed to say on my little cheat sheet. And I asked the question, and the interviewer sitting at TPE at NASPA went at each other, and they said, well, there's Barb, and she, and then there's one, and then I was like, that fit. Thank you. This is good. So I think, and I know that seems fairly dramatic, but I don't really actually think it's far from often the experience. I think in places where the dialogue isn't happening and that people aren't having the critical conversations, or it's not even on the pulse of that, yeah, we're not where we want to be, but at least we're talking about it, then you will get the response of, or, well, and I think you'll know, and it's not going to be something, I think having the conversation isn't something that you can fake. So I don't think people come to the table like, yeah, well, we're really working on blah, 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 and it's not happening. I think the natural human response is going to be, oh my God, I can't believe they asked that. We have not practiced and talked about, or we're not aware of how to respond, and it comes out just like that. And if you don't feel comfortable in that kind of environment, then you know it's not a good fit. If you feel called to say, well, it's my role to go and try to help this situation, and God bless you. But I think you'll know, like, that I knew at that moment that doesn't speak to me. I don't want them to be at a conference next year like, well, we have Darrell, right? And there's one. I don't want that experience. And so I think you will know for yourself, this doesn't resonate. You should at least be able to come up with something about what the institution is doing because it's a conversation that I know is occurring. So that's my feedback about that.
It reminds me, to not assume your experience here. Not that SU's perfect, but it's like Darrell said, I mean, we're striving is how I would say, and not to assume that that's happening. It's really easy to forget sometimes that it's not because you want it to be that way, so it's checking that. I also think, I do, looking at organizations, I look at the language they use in the mission, and I also know words aren't enough. I'm particularly try to get at sort of what's campus climate, right? So I don't want to hear only this is our percentage of diverse students, right? And so any way I can talk to people at the campus, or there's lots of ways you can look at university culture on websites and in conversations with people, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at what is the experience of diverse students, not just how many folks are here, right? And then there are some good models out there now about sort of assessing institutional culture, where they might be on a continuum around awareness, and it's pretty easy to spot where they are. And again, depending on where you feel called to be, that's okay, but it's again, not just assuming there's one or two things that define it, but there are some really concrete ways you can look at that and say where, how much work a university culture might, or community might be doing or have done.
I think to add to, these are some really great words of wisdom. To add to that, well, first, about Darrell's experience, I'm sorry that happened to you. And I saw the whole room, including me, go, oh, cringe. And I just encourage us, like, if you find yourself in that position, know that you don't have to accept a job there, that's not what it has to be. But try to receive those people as human beings who are growing, and the fact that you've asked that question and put them in an uncomfortable position may be the beginning of something for them. So just try not to judge, I guess, is what I would offer about that. But I think there are two things specifically about that this question that sort of strike me. And the first is, you need to know what you need in terms of a campus climate. So, you need to know, like, what are my non-negotiables and what are the things that I can work within before you can assess anything, right? Otherwise it's just like trying to, I don't know what you're comparing it to, because you don't have your own kind of standards grounded. So that's the first thing that I would suggest. The second thing, one of the things for me that's kind of important is, when I talk to folks about diversity on their campuses and what's going on for them, it almost always happens that they respond only in the framework of race and ethnicity. And that right there tells me a lot about the conversation that's happening on campus. And so, that's just good. You don't have to be looking for a job to have those kind of conversations. I mean, even when you're at conferences talking with colleagues, it's just, for those of you who might be going to NASPA, try it. Like, just ask and see what happens. And then take note of the folks who are having a conversation beyond race and ethnicity. That to me tells me an awful lot.
And I think a lot of the assessment, can be the way you assess anything else. Look at their website, read it. What do they say on these different issues? And then as you go into the interview and you talk to people and the questions that you get, because if you have Darrell's experience, that will give you an indication of where that school is at. But it's as with any other piece, you can look at it, and it usually becomes very obvious very quickly. And it's keeping in mind that, as with all websites, it's usually a little bit better on the website than it is when you're actually there on the ground. It's a little different. But yeah, and then as you're getting those answers from people, do they seem authentic and genuine, or do they seem very, very practiced? Because your question is going to be a little different from somebody else's, going to be a little different from the next person. And so they need to be able to be comfortable with it. Are they comfortable? If they're not comfortable, that kind of tells you where they are. And but you know, do your homework like everything else. And yeah, I would agree with Michelle. Make sure you know what you need and what you want.
That is good advice. Thank you all. We are down to our last pre-planned question. Again, kind of on the job hunt, and this is almost a two-part question. So, when asked in job interviews how you, the interviewee, define or interpret diversity, first of all, what is that question really asking? And what can you learn about the workplace culture from either how they ask it or how they respond to your answer that will help interviewers interviewees determine a good fit environment?
I'll be honest. So this was a question that was assigned to me, and when I saw it, I was like, I don't know. I don't know. First of all, I don't know what I would do if someone asked me to define or interpret diversity. If someone actually asked me that question, I might have to ask them, what's motivating you to ask that question? And I say that not to be a smart aleck, but because I guess the way I've heard the question phrased more frequently, or the way I've asked it, is talk to me about your experiences serving a diverse population. So, so I guess the reason why I didn't know have an answer to this is because I'm not sure if maybe someone has heard that question on an interview, in which case we probably need to talk about something else, or if the question really is about, you know, how do I respond to the diversity question? So I tossed that out to y'all. Which do you need to hear? How do I respond to the diversity question and what they're really asking, or what do I do when someone asks it in this particular way?
I had someone, I didn't ask this, but I had someone in our mock interviews that we just did last week ask the first part of that, how do you define diversity, not how you interpret, and then question mark. And it was interesting, we talked about there was a behind implication to that question that came up in the discussion afterwards, but I didn't ask it up front.
What was the behind the scenes implication?
Yeah, it was an international student academic advisor position, and most interviewees that have applied for that think of diversity only in a global other cultures or students from other countries that they've worked with, and don't go into exactly what you were talking about previously. And she was wanting someone to go into the layers of all diversity, not just. So that's what she looks for when someone's responding to that question.
So helpful. And so if that's the, you know, the, I don't know, I guess, I'm not sure I would trust people to ask me. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think when people are asking you about your approach to diversity, or what you think about diversity, or, you know, your definition, I guess if that's how they put it, I would urge you to really think about diversity in a global sense, sort of, yeah, what I was talking about earlier, and what this person was asking from you too. And, you know, be able to talk about experiences that you've had, or, you know, the things that you've learned in your program, or students you've worked with, or the ways in which you've been challenged or felt challenged. I think that's important. Certainly related to what Diane had said earlier, there is still a prevalence of people thinking about diversity in terms of compositions, ratios, numbers. And if you can, what I would be looking for someone to talk about is the many layers beyond the numbers. So what does it look like to have a diverse campus? Once folks arrive, how are we working with them? How are we supporting everybody? How are we helping folks have some intergroup dialogue? That kind of thing is what I would be looking for someone who I felt like I'd be actually looking for someone to talk about the ways in which they have engaged and how they hope to engage in their upcoming job.
I would add to that, the answers I've received sometimes have been along the lines of, well, I know everybody's unique and everybody brings different things and it's important to understand all of that. Kind of along that line, and I feel like, I don't know what you really think, right? So that doesn't help me. I just feel like it's a non-answer. I mean, I would rather someone would risk saying, well, this is my own identity that I've explored, or this is, I've had experience in this area, but I really feel like I so need to learn about social economic diversity, that's an area that's a gap for me. And it's something I'm being intentional about. It's okay, nobody has to know everything, but to sort of put that other answer feels to me like either you don't really know what I'm asking, or, I don't know. I just don't know how to interpret. Maybe you do and it's trying to be a safe answer, but it just leaves me as somebody interviewing not knowing. Right? I just don't know. I can't get a feel.
And I think a lot of it depends on exactly how they phrase the question and what they're looking for. But a lot of times what they really are looking for is to find out what your level of experience is in working with diverse populations and what your approach is to working with students, so that they want to make sure it is a good match. But I'd also say some of it depends on what you can learn is also how they ask it, who asks it. If Darrell and I are running the interview and he asks all the diversity questions and I don't, that's going to tell you something about the institution and where they are. Or at least it'll tell you something about me and him. But it may give you a good idea of what's going on there. And I would also encourage if it does leave you with some question about their philosophy or approach, you can always ask a follow-up question about it. If you start hearing like we're looking for a good fit, things like that, I'd be a little more suspicious of that, because whenever you start to hear that fit, that they're maybe looking for some underlying things. But yeah, it's really what question do they ask, who's doing the asking, will tell you something about what they're really looking for. But I do feel like most people are asking the question because they really want to know what your experience is, what your philosophy is.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for answering each of the pre-planned questions, but we're going to open it up to all of you. If anybody has any questions, raise your hand, and we have the panel to answer. Before I continue, does anybody need a refill on water?
Yes.
Okay.
I start with 2 cups. I do. This is
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question for the panel is, when you see microaggressions occurring in the workplace, as a person of color, how can you address it? But also, when you're addressing it with white colleagues, and the reverse, when it's a person of color doing it towards a white colleague, how have you experienced this and addressed the issue? And if I can give you context in regards to a situation, would that be helpful?
It's up to you.
Okay, so there was a situation where a white colleague said to, and I was just a witness to what was going on and was like, so a white colleague said to another white colleague, they called them a term, which is a literary reference, but it has derogatory connotations now. And so they're just going back and forth with this term and they didn't realize the other connotation. And I'm sitting there as a person of color like, I can't believe this is happening right in front of me. And so I didn't say anything because I froze. And then another colleague, another white colleague, who found out about the situation, confronted the person and said, hey, do you know about this term? And, the person was just great. They're like, no, I had no idea, please tell me about it. And I'm so sorry. Apologize to everybody. And so it's like, next time if that happens, how can I feel empowered to be able to say, hey, let me tell you about how this is impacting me.
Bystander responses, I'm going to say sometimes it's something that I struggle with. I mean, like even, I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, even in the line in C Street, and I had to think to myself, like, I really just want to pay for my food and leave. Like, I need to move on with my day. And sometimes I can do it and be like, exactly what the other person said, hey, did you know about, or I'm sorry, I overheard. It takes an awful lot of energy, and I find that I need to be in a cool place so that it doesn't come out like, hey, didn't you know, like, which is most often how it feels inside. And so I have learned to figure out if I'm feeling, hey, did you know, like to give myself the to do it. But when I am feeling the aggressive kind of response to just like that's not going to be helpful. Not to me and not to the person, because they'll just look at me and say, that crazy so-and-so, whatever, and not think about why I would have interjected myself in a conversation like that. Now, having said that, I'm also, part of the reason why I paused in not responding, aside from really to fully consider the question, is because there have been a number of times in my career where there's been a real power dynamic, which feels really unsafe to confront. And I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, sometimes, now I'm a little bit better because, kind of like, this is who I am, world, But I think especially starting out, I did not feel safe to say anything. So in that case, if that were to happen, I would suggest, again, have somebody you can talk to, a supervisor, a mentor, somebody who you can just kind of say, this just happened and I'm not really sure what to do. Someone who you can talk it out with so that you can gather your thoughts and then return to the person who microaggressed and just talk about, I experienced this, I observed this, I heard this, and this, this is the impact, and did you know? And just have that kind of a conversation.
Well, I think I'm just aware of my own, I try to be aware of my own triggering, right? So that I can also be attuned to that and make a decision, am I in the best place to also respond? I also think, I was thinking about this in different contexts. So it's been easier when I've been in a group of learners that's been identified in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's been seminars or workshops or retreats or where we're trying to be intentional. It's a lot easier, right? And the other thing is I try to practice. I try to practice, and I try to have accountability partners so that I can go and say, I just wanted to, it just didn't happen, right? So practicing with folks, interrupting, and that bystander response stuff, I think can help. Because there's no perfect, easy circumstance to do it in. And so the practicing helps, but it doesn't prepare you for every situation, but it helps you have courage. The other thing that I've done, and it depends on context, whether you see something happening or whether it's involved in something with another person. Sometimes all I can do is break the silence by saying, wow, I'm really uncomfortable with what just got said here, or what just happened here. Because sometimes that's just my entry point, like it's my breathing spot. Because I don't know what to say, but I know to be silent is not what I want to do. And so sometimes it's worked so that then the words come and I can do something. And sometimes they don't. But I really believe in interrupting the silence, and that's been one of the hardest things for me to do and learn to do, and I'm still practicing, because without interrupting the silence, it just goes on. And coming back can be helpful, and sometimes the most powerful thing is to try and interrupt that in the moment and not letting it stand, not letting its impact sit without any challenge.
Diane is really good at that. I've been in a number of situations. Hey, I'm really uncomfortable, and you do it in such a nice way. It's so inviting. Hey, I'm really uncomfortable, and I didn't know that was your pause to wait for the words to come. Because we won't tell anyone. But even if the words don't come, it's always been enough to say, hey, really, that's not okay with me. So she's a good teacher.
I think I share the sentiments that my colleagues have offered, and I think sometimes it's helpful to allow the natural response that you're feeling to actually happen. Because I think sometimes the not allowing it does then cause you to become even more afraid and even more afraid and even more afraid when it happens. And I think there's always room for grace afterward. Now, I'm obviously biased on this because I've had one of those situations where I was at a national conference and that we were given I'm going to share the little story. We were given this little snippet and we had to be characters in this thing to figure out how to do restorative justice, right? So, and these little slips of paper had descriptions. The descriptions were to inform us about the varying cultural dynamics that might be in the situation so we could have a conversation. Well, one of the descriptions described a person of color who was a recent immigrant to the U.S. and how they might struggle with these forms and systems that we would think everybody should get. This is how our judicial system is going to work. Well, one of my colleagues decided that they were going to mimic what they believed would be an immigrant voice in the Senate. Now, I'm watching one of the women in the group. She's getting uncomfortable. She's starting to kind of tear up. And I'm thinking to myself, crap, I'm at a national conference. Like, we're here. Like, these are all colleagues. I don't know these people. We're doing an activity. And what I mean by, if I hadn't gone through all of that and I just said, hey, maybe we shouldn't, we don't have to act like the characters, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't. So I just let the fear and discomfort override. And then the fact that I'm the eldest brother came out. And I said, stop. And he stopped. And the whole group. And I felt so bad. And I just said, we do not need to mimic what you think is the character. And I just went, and he was just like, and this guy started crying. It was a big, afterwards, we had the whole conference, and then, we went in this trust circle, and they said, what was the most formative moment of the conference? And he said, I have to say, the most formative moment of this whole experience that's life-changing is when I was doing this thing, and Jerome said, stop. And he said, what was formative about it was he didn't say, can we really revisit, blah, blah, blah. He said, stop. And in the immediate, I got, why would I do that? You know, he says, then all the tapes happen to me. Why would you mimic the character, and where did that come from, and why would you blah, blah, blah? Anyway, now I say all this, and I'm not telling you to scream out and stop. But what I am saying is I wish, for me in retrospect, I don't celebrate that I, told him strongly stop. I wish I hadn't let the fear override my initial desire to say, this is not the way we want to proceed. And I could have done that in that group of colleagues, and it would have been okay. But I think sometimes we let the fear and discomfort just keep building. And then it becomes an explosion, and it was an explosion, because I just felt like this is so unconscionable. This person, later the woman shared, like, my father was a recent immigrant and struggled to manage my college experience because of people who acted like, well, we can't understand you, and what are you talking about? So she said, so as this person was mimicking that, it brought up for me all of the struggle of my own family, and I could never advocate for my father, so I couldn't have voice for myself. So it was so deeply rooted, and I felt like I could have interjected earlier if I hadn't let that, sometimes debilitating fear. Because is there really ever a right time to interrupt behavior? No, it's not like, if I do it in the first 30 seconds, then everything will be okay. Like, no, there's no perfect time. It's just, how do you keep conscious of yourself and make sure that you're able to do it? Because we often know, unfortunately or fortunately, the universe has called you to be the person to say something. And you're there, and you're aware, and you know. And then it becomes the gift that you can offer to the experience if we allow the fear to subside as opposed to take over.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add on top of what has already been said. Other than, it's good if you can actually practice this, because you're going to be in situations where this is going to happen. And you have to decide sometimes, is it good for me to intervene now? Or is it good to come back to it later, depending on the situation? You have to judge that. I can't tell you when is the right time. One thing I will say, though, and this is to the white people out there, a gift you can give to your other colleagues is that you are the one who interrupts. If there's a bunch of you watching a scenario, and especially as white people, we cannot leave this. I'll wait till the black person says something. And no, if it's wrong, you need to be able to intervene. You need to be able to call this scenario out. That is a skill, and it's hard. Like, people often do not have a lot of experience in calling out, particularly things that may deal with race or gender. As a white man, I sometimes have to deal with these things, and I'm not saying that I'm always the best at it. I sometimes have the reaction like Darrell. I kind of start to get angry, and then I will say something. But I always feel better about a situation like that than choosing not to intervene or choosing to allow someone else to intervene for me. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. It doesn't make it ever easy. But I would encourage you to take that up as a responsibility for yourself, and that's part of how you do your own work.
All right. MJ, go ahead.
I was, thank you for your I was wondering, just because I've encountered this situation a few times and I will throughout my career, but how do I, as somebody with multiple, marginalized identities and also privileged identities, work with individuals who have absolutely no desire to learn about multicultural competence, know that they are not where they should be with it, but still have no desire to do so, but I still have to work with that individual.
It's always a challenge. And I think some of that challenge often comes from that person being afraid to confront. I recently read a really good article, which I had written down as a as a reference. Often beginning that conversation with somebody, we'll just say I often use the white man thing because that's what I come out of, is realizing, like most white men don't walk into the room and think, I'm a white man, I'm here, and I have all this privilege. Most people often identify in areas where they see that they don't have privilege. And so sometimes allowing that person to talk out of their areas of pain or where they feel that they have don't receive privilege, because as they can then articulate that, often you can start to help them use that to see where they do have privilege. I'm not saying that works 100% of the time or for everybody, but often when they can relate to this one thing and you can see, okay, here's an area where I'm not privileged in or something like that, and then they can use that to understand, oh, but that means as a white man I have privilege in these two very significant areas. So I just, that's one place to start. I'm not saying it's always effective, but it's something that I have used, particularly when I'm working with folks who are white, is I let them tell part of their story first, and then we can move from there.
I'm just thinking, this is the theory versus the reality, right? And so it is challenging, and I guess I go back to what I said earlier and what you just said too about storytelling. I mean, I think we all have vulnerable parts of our story. All of us do, and how do we make room for that? And for me, one of the reasons I was able to understand, I referred to earlier when I was at the Social Justice Training Institute, the pain in some stories I heard that I had no concept of. However, in some different identities in myself, I knew what it was like to be fearful of how I would be treated simply because I'm a woman, right? And so, and the pain and suffering for that was not the same, but it became a place for better understanding. So I try to a little bit what you said, try to find the places. We all have brokenness. All of us have brokenness. And so if we can make it okay to talk about that, then I think we can begin to open up, well, we begin to build a relationship. And when you start to build that kind of sense of trust a little bit, then it becomes easier to say, oh, well, and actually there's this other part of me that, like, I don't know what to do with. It becomes okay to be imperfect. I think we're so hard on ourselves, and when we are, we're also hard on other people, and so it's like, how do you bring that away? Make room.
Do we have any other questions? Lisa.
I really appreciated your question, and in a similar scenario, so in working with my students who are students where it's a large proportion of them are students of color, and they're at a developmental stage where they're saying a lot of things that I feel I need to come in and correct. When it's two students of color who are saying things to each other that I feel uncomfortable with, and I feel the general population in our space is uncomfortable with, but I'm coming in from a position of power as someone who's white and not feeling like it's my place to correct that, but also feeling like just on a human level it's not respectful and it is making the rest of us uncomfortable. I have those struggles as well, so I'm interested to know how to approach those situations or how to practice what would be appropriate in those situations and how to become comfortable if I should say something, because right now I'm thinking I should say something, but I'm not comfortable doing it. Understanding very recently my positions of power.
This is really funny. And when I was working at Creighton University, the director of housing used to say, we never come front, we care front. And I used to think, what does that really mean? But I do think there is this interesting notion of, am I coming in as a corrective authority, or am I bringing something of awareness that maybe isn't present. And I think how we come into a scenario impacts how it's received. I know that there's been times that people have come to give me an awareness of something, and I completely heard that differently. Then I know when somebody's come to confront and then therefore correct. I mean, you feel it, the tone is different. There's not an opportunity for really dialogue and a corrective action. So, you know what I mean? I think in those senses, I think it creates a different space, and we just have to be conscious, because sometimes the discomfort and the worry about how it's going to impact causes a confrontation as opposed to that dialogue or confrontation about the behavior. So think about it. I think that's one way in which, at least to be aware of.
Yeah, because I do think the disconnect is that I don't have a perception of how I should be entering this conversation to make sure that I'm respecting all the identities at play.
I found it really helpful to consult with others. When I was feeling like, hey, I'm recognizing something here, but I'm not really sure how I'm going to show up. So that's where relationships with folks across a lot of spectrums is really important, so that they can help me see something I didn't see. So I think you raising the question is really important, to stop and say, I see something, I'm just not sure, and that's okay. I mean, you will have that career in some ways, right? I mean, we're always doing that. But consulting with someone else has really helped me sometimes to realize, oh, okay, so this, I think it's kind of on the right track, or, oh, wow, I had never thought of this piece, which is really critical. And that either tells me there's something I will change in how I might approach someone, or maybe it's not me that approaches someone. Maybe I learned something from that, discussion. And so we need to support each other in this, right? To ask for help. It's okay to ask for help.
I just want to be cognizant of time. We probably have time for one more question.
If there's another question, can I make one more comment back to your thing? I also think how we understand power and what it means. I mean, I think sometimes the power in a situation is necessary to end or interrupt the behavior. And and what that really means, so I live in Campion. I know that students know who I am and the role I have on campus. Well, there was a behavior happening in the hallway yesterday that was offensive. It was two students of color. They were using language that was inappropriate, for anybody, including themselves, and they kept doing it over and over and over. And one of the students was doing it to get a reaction from other students, because they thought it's it's 5 o'clock, who's really here? So I opened the door and I said, I think we all are over it. Like, I think everybody on the floor, including me, we're over it, so you can stop. And then I said, and then let's talk about it. You probably don't recognize not only is what you're doing offensive to you, but it's offensive to everybody else who's listening to you on the floor. And the student said, okay, I'm sorry, I get it. I understand. And I recognize for him, it wasn't like, oh my God, not only I'm in trouble because he just came out and I know who the person is, but it was the sense of that, yes, there was a sense of the power of role, what that meant, and that dynamic to say, stop. And I wasn't, the first level wasn't a conversation, because it had gone on, and I was thinking, is he going to stop? I'm really hoping he's going to stop. So I don't have to say anything. It was really like, I need to interrupt the behavior now, because at this point it's gone on so long that I don't know how many students on this floor have been like, oh my God, we're going to have a floor meeting about this behavior. Do you know what I'm saying? So you, as the leader of that particular collegium space, might use the power and authority that you do have to interrupt the behavior. So I don't want to make that always a negative thing, the dynamic that we are.
If there's one other question, I didn't get here in time to talk about the resources. And I asked Diane already if anybody had mentioned the resource that came to my mind immediately, which is this movie. It's quite a few years old now, but it's totally worth it. It's called The Color of Fear. Folks know it. And it is focused on race as a dynamic, certainly, and it's all men. There's a version for women, just like the men's one better. And one of the reasons why I like it is because it is focused on race. There is an element for folks who have seen it around sexual orientation as well. But I think that it shows the movement that's possible within relationship, and the emotions are real. It's such a good reminder that this is like in the ground, dirty, like stuff. It's not just the theory, like we read about it in a book, we talk about it in class, we write a paper. Like it really kind of demonstrates this is what this looks like when people truly engage, and it's messy and it hurts. And I find the power in it to be instructive, and the emotion and even the hurting of it to be liberating. So if you haven't seen it, definitely see it. And be prepared to process, like have people you trust to process through. If it's been a while since you've seen it, see it again. Like it's one of those things, like certain books you should read like every 5 years. It's one of those.
So, are there any last questions? All right, well, I want to thank you all. Can we give a round of applause? We had this opportunity to get some first-hand insight, especially from key people that run our campus. So, and I also want to give a round of applause to Joelle for helping me co-monitor. Is there anything that you all want to plug before we?
Well, I think a round of applause for you.
Plug the White Privilege Conference. Next week, there's a premiere showing of a film by Chucky Butler called Breaking the Code? Cracking the Codes. Yes, Cracking the Codes. If there's any way you can see, you do have to get tickets.
Yeah, they are very expensive for students. I think they're $5.
Yeah, really decent. Chucky Butler actually has done the film. I think you're referring to the women one film. Yeah, and she's an amazing film director, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I encourage you to take advantage of that if you can. And I think Color Fear is in the library.
Anything else? Were these supposed to be passed out?
For anybody who wants them.
Or what are these?
This is just reminders about the White Privilege Conference.
Would anybody like this for a while?
They do offer volunteer discounts, so if you volunteer at the conference, you won't pay the full registration fees.
The last thing I want to say is that this may have been some important information, but I definitely think this is important information to sort of like relay and transcend the space. I think one question in mind is that we have a new cohort coming in, so how are we going to create an inclusive environment for them coming in? So think about our own experiences and thinking from that aspect. Okay, I hope you all have a good weekend.
Yay!